don't you just want to lick it? Launching Counter-Strike with the option -tools gives the console some new features, which is probably there to help mappers to spot problems with their maps, but I'm going to use these commands to dick about with the graphics for fun. Selecting the page CS2 Workshop just here gives us all these options to toggle on and off. Some don't do anything exciting, though they're probably quite important, while others do significantly change how everything looks, while probably being slightly less important. Let's start with good old Fullbright, which removes all of the Source 2 lighting benefits and returns the level back to how it used to look back when the map was being made in the editor, but with a shiny twist. It seems like even though it's Fullbright, the surfaces facing you light up more than those that are facing away, which gives everything an oddly shiny look as I'm flying about. But this makes sense because if I compare this with a fully Fullbright map that doesn't have this shiny effect, you can see that without any shading at all, it can get very confusing to know where one surface ends and where the next begins. In case you don't know from the hundreds of times I've talked about this already, Source and Source 2 light their maps by pre-calculating their lighting using ray tracing, in a process that can take hours and hours to complete. The better the quality of this pre-calculated lighting, the larger the map file sizes become, so Source 1 kept the shadow quality to a minimum, with CSGO relying on real-time shadows over the top of this to make things look okay. But Source 2's pre-calculated shadows look amazing already, so with Counter-Strike 2 I don't think we even need these real-time shadows too much anymore, and in some ways they're actually worse than the pre-calculated ones. This handy button lets us disable the real-time shadows, leaving just the pre-calculated ones that are beneath. I am so thankful this option exists, because in CSGO there's no easy toggle, presumably a makeshift attempt by Valve to prevent cheating in some way. Instead, you have to type this console command, which literally kills the shadows. Doesn't just disable them, it kills them. Not only is this really cruel, but it means you can't easily get them back again, because they're dead. And that's a shame because CSGO's shadows look horribly blobby and sad without them. But it's just as well I disabled them because it perfectly demonstrates how awful CSGO's underlying shadows look when compared with CS2's. The new map file is 3 times bigger, but I think you'll agree the shadows look more than 3 times better. There's even an option to lower the quality of CS2's shadow map, yet even in this state it still looks a million times better than CSGO's shadows did. This is probably one of the biggest improvements with Source 2 right here. But no matter how nice these pre-calculated shadows look, they can't update when things move. This includes these leaves here, which as a player of the game you probably don't care about, but it also means that players' shadows won't show up, which you might care about a bit more if you can't see them, especially when other players still can. And although much better than CSGO, these Source 2 shadows still look generally fuzzier than the real-time ones do, which isn't necessarily worse. To demonstrate this, I went to Morocco. Look, there's that thing from Bombsite A. That's when the sheer awesomeness of the whole thing struck me. To think, this is probably exactly where somebody from Valve has stood at some point in the past. I felt so honoured. Next, I ventured out into the desert and came across a Mirage. They even had similar roof trims. And this was when my discoveries began. You can see from the shadow of this post that it gets slightly less defined the further away from the object it gets. But why? That's because the sun is big, and not just a single point in the sky. So it behaves almost like lots of little lights, all in slightly different locations, meaning that there will be some spots where only some of these lights will reach the area, resulting in a half shadow, which is kind of like a blurry outline around the edges of the proper shadow. So this blurrier the further away from the object the shadow is something that CSGO's real-time shadows, and indeed Source 2's real-time shadows, cannot do. Is this a problem? Not really. You can see from the shadows cast here that even when they're cast from the tops of the buildings and landing on the ground below, they're still pretty well defined, gaining only a bit of blur at most. So CS2's very high shadow setting is probably a bit over the top with its crisp, clear definition, but high is quite realistic. I'd avoid medium setting since that fades out unconvincingly not far from your character's position. But get this, low setting disables the real-time shadows completely, on everything but your player models. Sure, the shadows on trees will no longer move and your player's shadow is a bit blobby and shimmery looking. But in some ways, CS2's low shadow setting is the closest to real life that you can get, and whenever you're indoors it will still look the same as higher settings would anyway. Low shadow setting misses out on pretty self-shadowing stuff, like how the shadows of these leaves pass down through other ones in this example. But you might prefer this to be disabled completely, as it looks simpler and maybe less distracting. But for those of you who like to turn everything up to higher setting for best definition, don't worry. This kind of self-shadowing looks awesome at highest setting, and the only time that CS2's sharp-looking real-time shadows will be noticeably wrong is when the shadows cast are from a long way away, like from the tops of the tall towers on Mirage. But get this, no tower on Mirage has a visible shadow anywhere within the playable space. It's almost as if this was done on purpose. But how should these distant shadows look? Well, kind of like this camel shadow, once it reaches down to the bottom of this large sand dune. Close up, his shadow starts solid and with clear outlines, but down the bottom ends up being super muddy and messy looking, which coincidentally mirrored my bowel movements that day. But no matter which shadow setting you choose, nothing will stop the shadows from being wrong anyway, because the sun's position in this map doesn't match up. Valve, please fix. I'll let you in on a secret. No matter how great we get at texturing and decorating a level, it will never look as nice as if we disable the textures completely. There's something timeless, something beautiful about the simplicity of displaying the lighting and nothing else, where the only colours we see are but the shades of lighting hitting and bouncing off surfaces and blending in with one another. Beautiful. I'm going to keep this setting on for a while because it makes it easier to see what the other options I'm toggling on and off are actually doing. Plus, like I said, it looks really pretty. Show lightmap res/luxels covers the level in tiny squares. You know I was saying the shadows in Source 2 look better? This is why, because of how many squares there are. Think of this as a massive texture covering the entire map, representing the shadows and how bright each spot should look. If I now lower the quality of the shadows, these squares get bigger and thus less able to represent smaller details, hence the blobbier looking shadows. As you might imagine, the squares in CSGO would have been much, much bigger again. But it's not just the surfaces that are lit in Counter-Strike 2. If we enable light probes, it fills the world around you with thousands of balls. More balls than you've ever seen before. If you like looking at balls, then this is definitely the mode for you. But what exactly are they for? Well, each of these represents a spot in the map that's had its lighting pre-calculated beforehand. It means that moving objects like players will have their characters lit correctly by simply grabbing lighting information from the nearest ball, and by covering their own body with it. That's right, Counter-Strike 2 lights you with balls, or at least the lighting information from them. Do we need this many balls? Even beyond the playable space and high up in the sky, there are thousands of balls. And I don't know the answer to this. It seems a bit excessive if you ask me, but what do I know? I don't really know what albedo does, but all it seems to do is to show how surfaces look if they weren't lit at all. And anything flashing is apparently out of range in some way. In a similar way, I guess the reflectivity and roughness options represent those properties on a scale from black to white. I think these are all here to check different parts of Source 2's texture properties. You might have heard of older methods like bump mapping and specular maps, which are effects you can give to textures to make them look more bumpy or shiny when they previously might not have looked right. But this has fallen out of favour in recent years as PBR has taken off. PBR, being physically based rendering, is kind of like an all-in-one system for representing how a material should look by simulating how light should interact with it, be it a shiny surface, a rough one, a translucent one, or a bit of everything. Gross. It's why newer games look right, and why everything in older games looks kind of artificial and computery. What is interesting though is the AO setting, which stands for Ambient Occlusion. You know where I'm going with this. As a whole, not a lot of stuff in this map has this setting because most of it's baked in with the pre-calculated lighting. So AO is used simply as an extra measure for lighting stuff that can move or change in some way, so you'll tend to see it around smaller and breakable props, which I guess need to have the shading in the surrounding area updated if they're destroyed. And yes, you'll see it around the spinning fans, and it's interesting to see how far this shading extends, far further than can be seen in practice. Same with your character model. Toggle third person and you can see how you darken the atmosphere around you wherever you go, and in the game. Third person view also lets you appreciate the quality of your character's animations, especially when he's flailing about in the air all like ah. And now we get onto the fun one, Cubemap view. This turns everything into a completely reflective mirror, allowing you to easily see which cubemap is being applied to literally every surface on the map. And yes, you can also enable light probes to generate tens of thousands of reflective balls everywhere. You know where I'm going to showcase this, don't you? Inside Palace, you can finally see how the game transitions between different cubemap areas, and how it can display several at the same time to generate a surprisingly good-looking, real-timey reflection from just a bunch of pre-drawn cubemaps. The trick is definitely how it fades out the reflection as it approaches the surface and your position, which you can see that in normal play and with normal types of reflections can look very acceptable, if not perfect. And enabling cubemap complexity lets you see where these reflections transition between one another. Now for optimization. It's hard to explain optimization. You might think that the best way to render a game is only to draw what's seen, but Source 1 seldom worked like that. So while this example shown here is Source 2, I've disabled the GPU culling, which makes Source 2 behave almost identically to how Source 1 worked. Let me explain what's going on here. Source 1, rather unsurprisingly, had an older and more basic approach to deciding what to render. It would split the map up into rooms and then would pre-calculate which rooms could be seen from the other rooms. It meant that as you entered a new area or room, all the surrounding visible chunks would also be loaded up in their entirety. I mean, there are other hand-placed elements you could do to try and improve things, but that was the general idea. However, if we enable CS2's new GPU culling feature, it aggressively hides things the moment they're hidden behind a wall or object, even if they're still in the same room as you are. It will even stop rendering things if they're hidden behind your player model, or even the weapon that you're holding. So this means that your frame rate might actually be better if you're holding a larger gun model that's hiding more of the screen. Not drawing stuff that's hidden makes sense in theory, though just know that calculating what not to draw also tends to come with a bit of slowdown, so it's a balancing act. In Source 1 there was a tool called an area portal, which would do this effect, and it was often placed in windows and doorways. And the question that mappers had in Source 1 was, why not just strap one of these area portals to the player's face to make it do exactly this no matter where they were stood? And the answer to that was, lol, that's a stupid idea, it wouldn't work, and if it did then Valve would have done it already. And now with Source 2, Valve has, and I found my frame rates to be generally better with the GPU culling on. Source 2, where you're sprayed in ball colours and have an area portal strapped to your face. And there are many other options on this menu which I won't be covering. A lot of these things, possibly all of them, are console commands that you can use already, should you know what to type to trigger them. But to see it all here in one simple, accessible menu, where everything's toggleable in just a few clicks, is going to save thousands of man hours. This is a screen that mappers, and myself, will gain mastery of over the coming years. Thanks Valve, very cool.